Aging Nazis under a new legal theory that even if they didn't murder anyone with their own hands.
I cried after my mom, and she heard me. She didn't say a word, and I saw her turn and walk away.
A rusted metal door, 80 years sealed shut, and behind it, the darkest secrets of the Third Reich. When researchers finally pried open the sealed archives of the Arolsen International Tracing Service in 2008, after decades of international pressure, they expected documents. They expected records. What they did not expect was to find the actual system the Nazis used to decide who would live and who would die.
It was a list of 227 names that came from the Arolsen archive in Germany.
Preserved in chilling detail. 6 columns, 5 rows, 30 small triangles arranged on a faded chart recovered from the liberated Dachau concentration camp. Each triangle a different color, each color a different category of human being. Red for political enemies, green for criminals, pink for homosexuals, purple for Jehovah's Witnesses, black for anyone the Nazis considered unfit for society, and yellow, always yellow, for the Jews. At a glance, any guard could look at a prisoner's uniform and know exactly how to treat them. Who deserved food, who deserved mercy, who deserved a quick death, and who would be worked until they collapsed, then thrown into the crematoriums. The researchers discovered something else that day: prisoner registration cards, millions of them. Each one documenting the moment a human being became a number, and on each card, a notation, the color of their triangle, the calculation of their worth. But here's what shocked the experts most. When they cross-referenced these cards with survival statistics, they found a pattern so disturbing that it challenged everything we thought we knew about the concentration camps. The triangle you wore didn't just affect how guards treated you. It affected how other prisoners treated you, whether they shared food with you, whether they warned you about selections, whether they tried to save your life or let you die. The Nazis hadn't just created a system of identification. They had created a system that turned victims into accomplices.
They deserve to be remembered. The Nazis wanted to eradicate who they were, what they stood for, and to destroy their future.
A machine that made prisoners participate in their own destruction. This is the story of what those secret documents revealed. A story of colored triangles and calculated murder. A story that starts with a simple question: what does it take to sort human beings like factory parts? To comprehend how the triangle system worked, you first need to understand what the concentration camps were designed to do. Because they were not simply prisons, they were laboratories of destruction, and the Nazis approached mass murder the way an engineer approaches a design problem. The first camps were chaotic. In 1933, after Hitler came to power, the regime began rounding up political opponents, communists, social democrats, trade unionists, anyone who spoke against the government. They threw them into makeshift facilities, abandoned factories, old castles, military barracks. At first, there was no system. Guards used whatever methods they wanted. Prisoners had no uniforms, no numbers, no categories. It was violent, but it was disorganized. Heinrich Himmler saw this as a weakness. The SS chief understood that if the concentration camp system was going to scale, if it was going to process thousands and eventually millions of prisoners, it needed standardization, it needed efficiency. And that meant the guards needed to know instantly, at a glance, who they were looking at, who deserved harsh treatment, who might be useful for labor, who should be worked to death, and who should be killed immediately. By 1937, the SS had developed a system that would be implemented across all concentration camps. Every prisoner would wear a colored triangle on their uniform. The triangle would be sewn onto the left breast and the right trouser leg, visible from any angle. And the color of that triangle would tell the guards everything they needed to know. Red triangles for political prisoners, communists, social democrats, resistance fighters, anyone the regime considered an ideological threat. These prisoners were dangerous because they had ideas, but they were also often educated, organized, and capable of leadership. Many of them became prisoner functionaries, the capos who ran the internal workings of the camps. Green triangles for criminals, men convicted of theft, fraud, violence. The Nazis viewed these prisoners as having tough temperaments, suitable for enforcing discipline among other inmates. Many green triangle prisoners became capos themselves, and their reputation for brutality made them feared even by the guards. Pink triangles for homosexuals. Men convicted under paragraph 175 of the German Criminal Code, which outlawed sexual acts between men. These prisoners faced some of the most severe treatment in the camps. Guards viewed them with particular contempt, and other prisoners often refused to associate with them. Survival rates for pink triangle prisoners were among the lowest. Purple triangles for Jehovah's Witnesses. They refused to serve in the military, refused to give the Hitler salute, refused to renounce their faith. The Nazis offered them a simple deal: sign a document renouncing their beliefs, and you can go free. Almost none of them did. They were considered stubborn, but not dangerous, and many were assigned to relatively safer work details as servants to SS officers. Black triangles for so-called asocials, the homeless, the unemployed, vagrants, alcoholics, prostitutes, Roma, and Sinti people. Anyone the regime considered a burden on society, anyone who did not fit the Nazi vision of productive citizenship. This category was deliberately vague, allowing guards to classify almost anyone under its umbrella. Blue triangles for emigrants, German citizens who had fled after 1933 and then returned. They were suspected of espionage, of working for foreign powers. They were considered traitors. And then there was yellow, the yellow triangle, or more precisely, two yellow triangles arranged to form a Star of David. Jewish prisoners. Here's where it gets complicated. Jewish prisoners were not placed in their own separate category. They were assigned to one of the existing groups, political, criminal, asocial, and then given an additional yellow triangle beneath their primary classification. A Jewish political prisoner wore a red triangle over a yellow triangle. A Jewish criminal wore green over yellow. The two triangles together formed a star, marking the prisoner as belonging to two categories simultaneously. But in practice, the yellow star overrode everything else. Jewish prisoners were placed at the absolute bottom of the camp hierarchy. Regardless of their other classification, regardless of their skills, regardless of their potential usefulness, the yellow star meant they would receive the worst treatment, the most dangerous work assignments, the smallest food rations, the first selections for the gas chambers. The system was elegant in its cruelty. Guards did not need to read files or check paperwork. They could scan a crowd of prisoners and instantly identify who was who. They could assign work details, distribute punishment, select victims for medical experiments, all based on a colored piece of cloth sewn onto a uniform. But here's what the Nazis did not anticipate. The prisoners themselves began to use the system. Inside the camps, a brutal social order emerged, based entirely on the triangle classifications. And this was perhaps the most insidious aspect of the system. It did not just allow guards to discriminate. It encouraged prisoners to discriminate against each other. It weaponized survival itself. Political prisoners, the red triangles, often formed the upper tier of the prisoner hierarchy. Many of them were educated, organized, and experienced at operating within hierarchical systems. They understood how to navigate bureaucracy. They knew how to manage people. They had experience from political parties, trade unions, and resistance organizations. When the SS needed prisoner functionaries to run the internal operations of the camp, they often turned to the Reds.
5 human skeletons have been unearthed at Adolf Hitler's in present-day Poland.
Criminal prisoners, the Green Triangles, competed with the Reds for these positions of power. At some camps, the Greens dominated. At others, the Reds held power. The struggle between these two groups was constant and sometimes deadly. At Buchenwald, political prisoners secretly organized to undermine the power of criminal capos. At other camps, Green Triangle prisoners formed gangs that extorted food and valuables from weaker inmates. The competition for power among the prisoner functionaries was a life-and-death struggle that played out every day, invisible to the guards, but critical to survival. But here's the thing about the prisoner hierarchy. It was not just about power or status. It was about survival in the most literal sense. Prisoners who held positions of authority had access to better food, better sleeping quarters, exemptions from the most dangerous work details. They could protect their friends and punish their enemies. They could decide, in small but meaningful ways, who lived and who died. A capo could assign a weak prisoner to light duty or send him to the quarry where men collapsed and died within weeks. A block elder could share extra rations with favorites or let others starve. The power of life and death was distributed throughout the prisoner population itself. And the triangle system made it easy to identify who was at the bottom of the hierarchy, who could be exploited without consequence, who could be ignored when food was distributed, who could be pushed aside when guards came looking for workers to send to the quarry or the brick factory or the medical experimentation block. Jewish prisoners, marked with the yellow star, were systematically excluded from positions of power. They were assigned the most dangerous work. They were given the smallest rations. When other prisoners stole food or blankets, they stole from the Jews first. When guards needed victims for punishment, they selected Jews first. When selections came for the gas chambers, Jews went first. The yellow star was not just identification. It was a target. The archives contain thousands of prisoner registration cards from camps across the Nazi system. Each card is a bureaucratic record of a human life reduced to data points: name, birth date, nationality, profession, prisoner number, and in the upper corner, a notation indicating the color of their triangle, the color that would determine everything that followed. When historians began analyzing these cards after the archives were opened, they noticed patterns that had never been fully documented before. Survival rates varied dramatically by triangle classification. Political prisoners had the highest survival rates among those who made it past the initial selection. Jehovah's Witnesses, despite the harshness of their treatment, also showed relatively high survival because they were often assigned to less dangerous work details and because their faith communities supported each other. Criminal prisoners survived at high rates because many of them held positions of power as capos, but pink triangle prisoners, survival rates under 20% at some camps. They were outcasts even among the outcasts. Black triangle prisoners often worked to death within months. They had no community, no support network, no one to share food or warn them of danger. And Jewish prisoners marked with the yellow star.
The concentration camps had a very definite set of rules based on the practices that were developed at the original camp at Dachau.
At camps like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor, survival rates approached 0. The camps were designed specifically to kill them. The triangle was not just identification, it was a death sentence with variable timing. When the Allies liberated the concentration camps in 1945, they found something unexpected: meticulous records, mountains of paperwork, card files organized with German precision, documenting every prisoner who had passed through the system. The Nazis, even as they tried to destroy evidence of the gas chambers and crematoriums, had preserved their administrative records. They had kept track of every transport, every arrival, every death. They had recorded names, numbers, nationalities, and reasons for imprisonment. They had created a paper trail of genocide that would eventually condemn them. These records were gathered by the Allied powers and eventually consolidated into the International Tracing Service, located in Bad Arolsen, Germany. For decades, the ITS was used primarily to help survivors and their families trace missing relatives, mothers looking for children, husbands looking for wives, children looking for parents who never came home. But access was restricted. Researchers could not freely examine the documents. The full scope of what the archives contained remained hidden from scholarly investigation. When the archives were finally opened to scholars in 2008, what they found was staggering. Not just the volume of records, but the detail. The camps had tracked everything with bureaucratic obsession. Prisoner registration cards documented the moment a person entered the system. Their name was replaced with a number, their identity was replaced with a category, and their triangle color was noted in the file, a bureaucratic notation that would shape every aspect of their remaining life. These cards were created by prisoner clerks working under SS supervision, and they were stored in the registry of the political department, updated when a prisoner was transferred or died. But here's what struck researchers most deeply. The prisoner registration cards often included a space for recording useful skills: a mechanic, an electrician, a doctor, a carpenter. The Nazis wanted to know what value a prisoner might have for forced labor. They wanted to extract maximum productivity before the prisoner died. But for many prisoners, especially those marked with certain triangles, this field was left blank, or it was filled in and then ignored. A Jewish doctor might have his profession recorded, but that notation meant nothing when selections came for the gas chambers. The system was designed to extract labor, yes, but it was also designed to kill. And the triangle told the guards which priority came first. At Auschwitz, the processing of new arrivals became a brutal assembly line of death. Prisoners stepped off the transport trains, blinking in the harsh light after days of darkness in sealed cattle cars, and were immediately subjected to selection. Guards would look at them, assess their physical condition in a matter of seconds, and make a split-second decision. Those who appeared capable of work went to the right. Those who did not went to the left. The left led directly to the gas chambers. For Jewish prisoners, especially women, children, and the elderly, the selection process was often the end. They never received a prisoner number. They never had a registration card created. They went directly from the trains to the gas chambers. Their existence never officially recorded in the camp's files. They disappeared into smoke before the bureaucracy could catch up with them. The archives contain evidence of this in the gaps. Transports that arrived with 1,000 people, but only a few hundred prisoner cards created. The missing numbers represent the ones who were killed immediately, their bodies burned before the paperwork could catch up. These are the invisible dead, the ones who left no trace in the Nazi record-keeping system. Their absence in the files is itself a form of testimony. When the cell blocks of camps like Sachsenhausen were finally opened for examination decades after the war, researchers found more than documents. They found the physical traces of suffering, evidence that the prisoners themselves had left behind, scratched into walls, hidden in corners, preserved against all odds. The cell block at Sachsenhausen was separated from the rest of the camp by a wall. It was a prison within a prison, a place of special punishment, a place where the SS conducted interrogations that left prisoners broken in body and mind, a place of torture and murder away from the eyes of even the regular prisoners. The building originally contained 80 cells, along with guard rooms and interrogation rooms. The design was panoptical, allowing guards to observe multiple cells from a central position. Prisoners could be isolated for days, weeks, months. Some never left. They entered those cells as human beings and left as corpses, their bodies disposed of before anyone could ask questions. The cells themselves were cramped, cold, dark. Prisoners were subjected to what the SS called camp punishments: solitary confinement in complete darkness, deprivation of food and water, systematic beatings, and a practice called pole hanging, where prisoners were suspended by their arms, which were tied behind their backs for hours at a time. The agony was indescribable. Shoulders dislocated, muscles torn. Many prisoners died from the torture. Others were left permanently crippled, their bodies broken even if they somehow survived. Among the prisoners held in these cells were some of the most famous names of the resistance. Georg Elser, the man who nearly assassinated Hitler with a bomb in 1939, spent years in Sachsenhausen's cell block before being executed just weeks before the war ended. The French Prime Minister Paul Reynaud was held here. So were countless resistance fighters, political prisoners, and anyone the Gestapo wanted to break. When researchers examined the remaining cells in the 1990s, they found inscriptions on the walls, names, dates, messages. Prisoners had scratched records of their existence into the stone and plaster, small acts of defiance against a system designed to erase them entirely. These were the final testimonies of the dying, preserved in the walls themselves. One cell, designated Cell 601, attracted particular attention. The walls contained inscriptions from prisoners held during the Nazi era, but also from prisoners held after the war when the Soviets converted the camp into a special internment facility. Before the cell was opened as a memorial in 1946, authorities had covered some of the inscriptions with plaster, hiding them from view. Decades later, using thermal imaging and other advanced techniques, researchers were able to reveal what had been hidden beneath the surface. The inscriptions told stories of desperation, of faith, of rage. They recorded final messages to families. They documented the names of guards and the dates of tortures. They preserved, in the words of the prisoners themselves, evidence that the Nazis had tried to destroy. The cell blocks also yielded physical artifacts, fragments of prisoner uniforms, triangles still sewn to the cloth. The colors faded, but still recognizable. Red for the political prisoners, pink for the homosexuals, yellow stars for the Jews. Each piece of fabric represented a life. Each triangle represented a fate. And each artifact told a story that the documents alone could never capture. The opening of the archives transformed our understanding of the concentration camp system, but it also raised questions that historians are still grappling with today. The triangle system was not just a tool of identification, it was a tool of control. By creating categories, by assigning colors, by making discrimination visible and systematic, the Nazis turned the camps into machines of mutual destruction. Prisoners did not simply suffer at the hands of guards. they suffered at the hands of each other, competing for survival in a system designed to make them complicit in their own oppression. The psychological genius of the system, if it can be called that, was its simplicity. Guards did not need training manuals or complex instructions. They could see at a glance who was who, and prisoners could see it too. In a world stripped of everything else, the triangle became identity. It became destiny. Survivors of the camps carried the weight of these triangles for the rest of their lives. Political prisoners could point to their red triangles as evidence of resistance. Jehovah's Witnesses could point to their purple triangles as evidence of faith. But pink triangle prisoners, many of them returned home to find that the laws under which they had been imprisoned still existed. Paragraph 175 remained on the books in West Germany until 1969. Men who had survived the camps could still be prosecuted for the same acts that had put them there. Their suffering was not acknowledged. Their persecution was not recognized as persecution at all. Black triangle prisoners, the asocials, were often denied recognition as victims entirely. Their imprisonment was treated as legitimate, as if they had deserved their fate. It took decades for researchers to document the full scope of persecution faced by Roma and Sinti people, many of whom had been classified under the Black Triangle. Their stories were erased twice, first by the Nazis who killed them, then by a post-war society that refused to acknowledge what had been done. And Jewish survivors carried the yellow star as both a mark of suffering and a symbol of identity. The star that had been imposed on them as a badge of shame was reclaimed as a symbol of remembrance. But the memories of what that star had meant inside the camps, the systematic exclusion, the violence, the constant proximity to death, those memories remained. They lived in the bodies of survivors. They passed down through generations. They echo still. The prisoner registration cards in the Arolsen archives now serve as tools for tracing family histories. Descendants of victims can request information about relatives who disappeared into the camp system. They can see the cards that were created when their grandparents, their parents, their aunts and uncles entered the camps. They can see the triangle color that was assigned, and they can understand, in a way that was not possible before, what that color meant. The archives contain over 30 million documents. They include records from the concentration camps, the forced labor programs, the displaced persons camps that existed after the war. They document not just death, but survival, not just persecution, but resistance. When experts first examined the triangle chart recovered from Dachau, they saw a bureaucratic document, a tool of administration. But they also saw something else. They saw the Nazi belief that human beings could be sorted like objects, categorized, labeled, assigned differential value based on who they were rather than what they had done. And they saw the consequences of that belief written in the survival statistics, in the prisoner testimonies, in the inscriptions scratched into the walls of the cell blocks. The triangle was never just a piece of cloth. It was a philosophy made visible, a worldview sewn onto a uniform. And 80 years later, when those archives were finally opened, that philosophy stood exposed for what it had always been. Not a system of identification, a system of extermination, color-coded for efficiency, designed to sort human beings into categories of worth, implemented with the cold precision of a factory process. And the colors, faded now but still legible on the scraps of cloth preserved in museum collections, still speak. Red, green, pink, purple, black, yellow, each one a story, each one a life, each one a reminder of what happens when human beings are reduced to categories. The The camps are empty now. The cells are silent. But the records remain, and they tell us everything we need to know about the distance between civilization and barbarism. It is exactly the width of a colored triangle.